I don't know what the word would be, like instead of a feminist, it's like a masculinist, like the guys really needed. Where did this all start off with your background?
Yeah, let me just mention that the term I prefer, if if you're going to use something like a counterpart to feminist, it would be masculist,
Masculist, I
because
like that.
masculist, because a feminist is not a femininist, and so a masculist is
I
not a
gotcha.
masculinist. Um, I think that's a legit term. I think I like it better than men's rights activist, because it's about much more than just rights. It's about,
Hmm.
you know, relationships and sociology and psychology and community, you know?
Hmm.
So, yeah, I don't mind being called a masculist. So, where did it all begin? Is that what you want to know?
Hmm.
Well, I have two main places where I could go back to tell the story. I could go all the way back to when I was a kid, or I could go back to when I became sort of active in a public sphere with starting a radio show. That was when I was in my 30s. Which version do you want? How much time do we have?
I'm as much time as you like. I think the kid as a thing is actually good because it's very applicable to a lot of men. In my experience, I am stepping into the men's workspace in my own regard, and when I talk to people, the the first thing that comes to mind is like it's always like one thing. Oh, you know what the one problem with this? If we just solve this one problem, then everything. Oh, it's just this one problem. It's just guys need to be more sensitive. Guys need to stand up. If there's more men that, and it's like 20 different people and 20 different ideas. And like you're all correct if you take it all and just mesh it together and create a narrative to it. And very often, what a lot of people I've been talking to don't realize is how many of the problems they do stem in childhood, and it can then carry over into adulthood, which you can get the young boy who just wasn't properly taught how to be emotionally expressive or how to be emotionally self-regulated, how to integrate their ambitiousness in a healthy way without beating other people up, and they turn into full-grown adults and they still have the same problems. And then there's this feeling of, I've heard this quote way too many times. How is someone this old and they still act this way? As though like a certain age just is going to be like a download from the universe is just going to hit you. Like, yeah, maturity does catch up, but a lot of us are just basically, to some degree, results of our childhood, results of our society, results of the people around us. And then trying to break apart that piece and say, like, what are all the little pieces that got to you where you are? And in your case, like you said a second ago, it sounds like childhood was a good starting point to
Yeah,
then feed into how you
yeah,
got into your work, which got into where you are now.
yeah. Um, Before I go back to tell the story uh, that I remember from my childhood,
Hmm.
I do want to mention that I am one of those people who has one particular thing in mind
Hmm.
that I think would make a huge difference if we could change the circumstances of that one thing. Now, it's not one little thing. It's really one monumental thing. And that's the reason why I identify it. It is sort of the hub of lots of problems in men's lives. And so in law school, they teach lawyers about litigators who are in courtrooms. They teach lawyers about the theory of the case. The most important thing lawyers can do, litigators are taught, is identify your theory of the case. It's got to be something that's simple, easily understood by the jury, doesn't get bogged down in a lot of details and statistics. It's got to be something that the jury can listen to and say, yeah, yeah, I can feel that. I've seen that. That makes sense to me. And so, maybe we'll get to my one big thing,
Mm-hmm.
but I do have one big thing. Do you know the Aesop's fable about the fox and the hedgehog?
I think maybe if you can refresh me real quick.
Well, yeah, in Aesop's telling, the fox knows many things. The hedgehog knows one thing. I'm a hedgehog. I'm a hedgehog. All right, so to my childhood.
Mm-hmm.
This is way back in the early 50s. I was born in 51. I don't know exactly how old I was when I remember this from, but it was probably, when I was 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, something like that. You know how, and before I tell the story, I want to mirror it with something that is much more familiar to us, that we all readily know is not a good thing. But we readily know that this thing that I'm going to use as a mirror is what we readily know is not a good thing to do with or for or to a girl. We all know that it's not a good thing when you see a girl who is really good at sports to say, gee, Susie, you're really good at sports, ... for a girl. Or it's not good to say to her, gee, Susie, you're really good at math, ... for a girl. Mm-hmm. And the third one I like to point out is, gee, Susie, you're really good at science, ... for a girl. We know that that's not a good thing to say to a little girl. It sends a very weird and restrictive message. Sort of as if it's supposed to be a compliment, but it's a left-handed compliment at best.
Backhanded and it's compliment, yeah.
Yeah. It sends the message to the little girl that, well, is there something wrong with me? Are you trying to tell me I'm odd, I'm weird, I don't belong? What are you telling me? Mm-hmm. What I used to hear as a little boy was, gee, Jack, you're really good with babies. ... for a boy. And that sort of is my entryway to the one big thing, but we don't have to go there just now. Now, I didn't know at the time I heard this anything about sexism. I don't even know if the word sexism had been invented yet. I guess it had, but it wasn't in popular use. I certainly didn't know it. I didn't know anything about gender issues or restrictive gender roles, but I knew there was something I didn't like about that. And if I had not had parents, especially my mother, who were, very much in my corner, telling me I was a great kid and, everything, and they loved me and I was a good kid, and they helped build my confidence. But if I hadn't had them to lean on to assure myself that I was okay, I'm not weird, I'm not odd, I might have been like, whoa, I guess I better stay away from the babies. But I didn't. I continued to love babies, and I still love babies. I can't think of anything that's more fun than a baby. Mm-hmm. So that's the earliest memory I have. Completely without articulation, had no words for it. Now, I'm going to jump ahead now to the second entry point where I became publicly active. I became an activist. I was on a co-ed softball team in the early and mid 80s, maybe even into the late 80s. It was huge fun for us. Co-ed softball team, a lot of nice people. After each game, and we were a good team, by the way. After each game, we would go out and we would party. We would go to a bar. We had our team bar. We would go to our team bar and drink and eat a little bit and dance and talk and have a ball. Well, 2 weeks in a row, 2 separate teammates, women teammates, had me at a table, and they were talking with me about their boyfriends. And they were both telling me, told me tales of woe about their boyfriends. I don't even remember what the details were, but I do remember that both of them ended their stories with, and so he's a real jerk, don't you think? And both times, all I could do was to say, well, maybe he's a jerk, but, based on what you're telling me, from his point of view, maybe it looks like this. And I don't remember again what I said, but I remember that it was just something that was perfectly obvious to me as a man, as a possibility for what he was thinking in the context of the situation she told me from a woman's point of view. Both times, these women, after hearing me offer the alternative explanation for his being the way he was, both times they said, oh my God, I never thought of that. And, maybe because I had been primed by a couple of things in my childhood, I was ready to say, at that point, I said to my my girlfriend, who was also a woman on the team, I think I'm going to start a magazine. I want to call it Everyman.
Mm.
And she said, well, printing is pretty expensive and postage is pretty expensive. Why don't you do a radio show? Ah, great idea. So I contacted the student-run station at Towson University north of Baltimore and pitched them on the idea. It took a while. They put me through my paces. They wanted to know more. They wanted a pilot episode. And I went through all that. They kind of liked it and they put me on the air. And I was on the air from 83 to 89,
Wow.
pretty much every week.
Yeah.
And it became quickly very clear that there was much more involved in the topics we talked about. And the topics we talked about all involved men or boys or men and boys. And it became quickly clear that this is more than just about men and women having happy relationships and being in love and, all that kind of stuff. Serious social issues were involved. And I've just been captivated by the subject. You could say I'm a monomaniac. It's all I think about. You could say I'm obsessed.
Mm-hmm.
It's all I think about it all the time. And I couldn't disagree. It is my primary fascination in life. And I think it is really my life's mission is to call attention to the need to look with fresh, open eyes and open hearts and open minds at what's really going on with men and being ready to accept the possibility that it's really not right to say men have all the power, men have all the advantages, and men have all the privileges. The idea of garbage in, garbage out. If we run our policy-making machinery with the input that men have it all, men have all the power, men don't have any problems, men have all the advantages, we're going to get garbage out in our policy making. And I think we see a lot of that scattered detritus in our daily lives. I mean, take a look at how many men are in jail. Take a look at who's committing suicide.
Yeah. Yep.
So that's me. That's how I got here.
Yeah. I'm really curious to get your perspective on where all this came from. But the point you made about the men in jail, men in suicide, things like that, it's an interesting, we'll say, a statistical. It's like a bias in human psychology that we just generally, unless you really sit down and look at the numbers and understand how numbers work, it's very easy to misinterpret what you're seeing. And it's one thing I tell people about is like people take the example of like, well, I think the CEOs globally is like 5-to-1 male to women. And I'm just like, well, that's clearly not fair. And it's like, yeah, 99.999% of people are not even friggin' CEOs. Well, most of the men commit most of the violent crime. Less than 1% of men globally commit violent crime. So you're just excluding an entire 99.9% of the population to fit the narrative of this one small portion. But it sells. It's newsworthy. It's going to get clicks online. It's going to get
there's a name. There's a name for that reasoning fallacy, that reasoning error.
Yeah.
It's called the apex fallacy. That we all tend to look at the top and the most, and we try to extrapolate from that concentration of something to the population as a whole. The way I like to put it, I'm glad you mentioned the Fortune 500, all the CEOs at the top. We talk about the Fortune 500. We don't talk about the misfortune 5 million.
Yeah.
That often gets people to go, yeah, I never thought of that.
That's something I remember hearing about it. I think it was it's kind of a different direction, but the apex fallacy sounds very similar to the prestige bias that I've heard about.
No, I've not heard of that.
It's something I came across in a book that was talking. It was a book talking about the impacts, the negative impacts of social media, and especially with young girls. And the two biases they go through is the comparison bias and the prestige bias. Comparison bias is basically, what is everyone else doing? Do that because we have a natural inclination to be part of the group, part of the tribe. And there's just natural mechanisms going on psychologically that want to make sure you're not going to be excluded, because exclusion could mean death millions of years ago. The prestige bias is who is the best person in the group, who's being perceived as the best, what are they doing? I should copy them. And it sounds like the apex, in this case, it's like looking at the top of a particular, not just a group of people. In the case of like young girls or young boys, they might see the young boys say, who's the biggest, strongest, toughest, biggest biceps, like who's got the nicest, like what does he wear? What does he do? What kind of things is he into? We should do that. Girls might do the same thing, except with social media, it's getting to be pretty bad when that they're being pulled into, oh, you need weight loss products. Oh, you need more makeup. Oh, you need, plastic surgery. Why? Because Kim Kardashian or Giselle are the ones who are the top doing that. But along this line of people don't realize how many psychological biases they're walking around with every day that can just kind of flick online under the right circumstances, and looking at men, how they're succeeding and saying like, well, you have privilege, you have this, you have that, you shouldn't be complaining, you don't have to cry. And it's like how you're sweeping so many men under the rug just to try to point to that one guy. Well, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, they're all dudes. This is not fair. And it's like, I wish I was Bill Gates. I wish I was Elon Musk. Wish I had that much money and power. But yeah, sure. But just this detraction of so many other men that are being pulled in, but recognizing on a group level, like you said, the apex fallacy, it's a group phenomenon. It's very difficult to get through because it's a combination of some people just literally can't see it. They're not self-aware enough to see it, or there's just bigger conflicting interests behind the scenes. Like you mentioned in your background, I was reading a little bit about how something with advertising where like they had to cut the show because the women wouldn't have approved of the advertising and they were going to lose advertising money from the publication.
So that's, I think, a little bit of a conflation of two things that are in my background. One is that my book, Goodwill Toward Men.
Book. That's what it was.
Yes.
Yeah.
The book Goodwill Toward Men in 1994 was canceled just as it was being published. And this was before canceling was a thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. So
yeah,
what is your thoughts on where all this, it's not an all one and done thing. I think feminism has its benefits here and there, but going too far in one direction and kind of like plowing too hard in one direction and having to swing back. Where did this all really start to originate from, and how has it progressed in the wrong way? Is it progressing in the right way? Things like that.
Yeah. My view is that it progressed to where it didn't want to progress anymore. And it's sort of leaving men saying, wait a second. This was supposed to help us too. This was all about sexism and gender expectations and unfair limitations on what each of us could do. Here's what I think happened. I'll mention first that about 10 years ago, I went back to sort of the seminal work of the current stage of the women's movement, which was a book by a woman named Betty Friedan. She wrote The Feminine Mystique. Are you familiar with that book?
No, I'll write it down and check it out sometime.
Yeah, it is typically pointed to as the beginning of the modern stage of the women's movement. Betty Friedan was a magazine writer, wrote mostly for women's magazines. She went to Smith College. She was, quite a pistol. I expected when I went back to read this book about the beginning of the women's movement, and this was about 10 years ago, so we're talking, 2010 roughly, when there was just a lot of strife and discord and a lot of male bashing going on. I expected that the book that got all of this kicked off was probably going to be a pretty mean and ugly book toward men. Not the case at all. Betty Friedan was pretty admirably, wonderfully nice and balanced. She didn't blame men for the problems she was talking about that women were facing. Her basic thesis was that there are a lot of really smart, talented women who love their kids, they're happy being mothers, but too much of any good thing is a bad thing. And they're sort of going crazy, eating too many benzodiazepines at home every day when, they really have other talents that they wish they could apply. And this book resonated instantly with a bazillion women. They're like, yes, Yes, thank you for saying that. I do love my kids, but I don't want to be with them all day, every day. Oh, I want to be a lawyer. I want to be a doctor. I want to be a scientist. I want to, open a shop. Whatever. So she was nice. She was so fair toward men, in fact, that in her book, which was primarily about and unabashedly about the problem that had no name. That's what she called it. The problem that had no name. The problem of limiting women to a narrow sphere of activity. Even in that book, she cited the fact that it's not a picnic for men either. And she mentioned favorably, approvingly, a magazine article, Red Book magazine, in I think it was April of 62. The book was published in 63. She had come across this article in 62. And it was titled, Why Young Husbands Feel Trapped. She cited this as a way of saying, look, it's not great for men either. So I was really impressed throughout the book at how friendly she was to men. So how did this all get started? How did the problems with our current situation get started? Here's what I think. And I mentioned that I think the women's movement progressed until it didn't want to progress anymore. When the women's movement started, the leaders of the I should mention that Betty Friedan went on to she was a co-founder of the National Organization for Women, and she was its first president. So she was very influential in this whole current stage of feminism. I think it's fair to say it's the current stage. I think, that there is the DNA is pretty much the same, except it got mutated. And mutations can cause bad diseases. The leaders of the women's movement, including Betty Friedan, wanted to get more and more women to join their organization, the National Organization for Women. But they started hearing these little whispers from men about how this was great for men too, because men were saying things like, well, yeah, I'm going to, not have to make as much money because my wife will be making money. And even more importantly, I'm going to have a much closer and more intimate, loving relationship with my kids. Yeah, I'm going to be, ideally, if this movement really is true to its word, I'm going to be equal to my wife in the affairs of the family and at home. And I'm not talking about the checkbook. I'm talking about relationships with the kids. The fathers wanted to be as much the primary parent as the mother is. Two primary parents. Women started thinking, well, wait a second, hold on a second here. Does that mean that when my son or daughter falls down outside and she is hurt and wants to run inside the house to get to get some assurance that it's okay and somebody to take care of him or her, that she's not going to run to me anymore? She's going to run right past me and go, Daddy. And a lot of women thought, wait a second, I'm the mother. I'm the mother. And so they weren't so crazy about the idea that mirrors the idea they were crazy about. They're crazy about opportunity in the formerly male domain. They weren't so crazy about men having full opportunity in the formerly female domain. And so there was this problem. A lot of women were sort of, backing up from feminism a little bit. We don't really think we like the way this is going. So how did the leaders of the women's movement overcome this, marketing problem, this conceptual problem of the product that they are selling? Well, very effectively. In July of 1969, a group of women in New York called the Red Stockings issued the Red Stockings Manifesto. The Red Stockings Manifesto maintained, in some pretty bold language, strong language, not very measured language at all, women are oppressed. Our oppression is total. We identify men as the agents of our oppression.
Mm.
So if you can succeed, and they did succeed because they had the media loving this whole thing. Yeah, that's true, man. All the men in the Fortune 500 companies, it's not fair. The whole thing was just ready to go. Men became culturally recognized as mean, bad oppressors.
Yeah.
Well, how do you deal with your oppressors? You don't sit at a bargaining table with them and say, well, what would you like when we make this change? Well, what would you like when we make this change? How should this be for you? How should this be for you? You don't negotiate with your oppressors. You at least ignore them, or you just try to destroy them. You try to kill them. You try to isolate them. You try to shun them. You try to get them out of the picture. You try to completely disempower them so that you get what you want and you don't have to feel guilty about it, because they're not stakeholders and partners that you are selfishly ignoring. They are oppressors, and they deserve every bad thing that they get from us. That's what I think has happened.
Mm.
And if you think about how men kept women out of the male domain and the strategies that the early women's movement used to make their point, they talked a lot about stereotypes.
Mm-hmm.
Stereotypes about women, negative stereotypes about women. They also talked about positive stereotypes about men. Men are strong and smart and businesslike and all of that stuff. That's why they should be running business and government. And men are logical, which is why they should be in charge of academia. And women aren't logical. They cry too much. They can't make decisions. They just want to make everybody happy. All of those stereotypes were also used as justifications for why it's men, not women, who should be in the formerly male domain. That's the way it should be. It's not because women are bad. It's just because, they're women. You know how women are. Okay, so what do we have going on now? Do we have any negative stereotypes of men? Yes, we do. Do we have any overly positive stereotypes of women? Yes, we do. I can show you a poster that was held aloft at the 2017 Women's March in Washington, a poster that actually says, this is a printed poster, not just somebody's one-off drawing, a printed poster. Women are perfect. Swear to God. Swear to God.
I believe it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And what else is there? When there's a conflict between a man and a woman, believe the woman.
Believe the woman, yeah.
Believe the woman.
Believe her.
Call the man a liar. Believe the woman. So let's talk about the stereotypes against men and the overly positive stereotypes about women and the effect that they have today. I believe, and this is where we get to the theory of my case, where I point to one central idea that people all understand. All of those stereotypes, just as the stereotypes about women and the overly positive stereotypes about men, served men's interests to keep women out of their domain. The current stereotypes, negative stereotypes about men and the positive stereotypes about women, all serve to keep men out of women's domain. What is the primary feature of the women's domain? Well, let's back up for a second. Think about the male power structure. It's a hierarchy, right? Narrow at the top, very wide at the bottom, a pyramid. But think of it as a skyscraper, an office building, where lots of economic things take place. There's a dollar sign at the top of this skyscraper, or at the top of this pyramid. And men sort of have to climb to get access to that dollar sign. And the closer you get to that dollar sign, the richer you are, the more money you make. One of the parts of the apex fallacy is that the men at the top do not care at all about the men at the bottom. There's no real benefit to the fact that I am of the same sex as that bazillionaire up there. So what? Doesn't care about me. On the other hand, now let's think about, what does the female power structure look like? It's not a skyscraper. You can't be 12 miles away and see it because it's more like a convention center. It might be only 2 or 3 stories tall, but it covers 14 acres. And what goes on in there? It's not competition. It's not striving. What goes on in there is sisterhood and networking and mutual support and relationships and expression of feelings and empathy. There's no dollar sign at the top of this structure because there is no top of this structure, except maybe a flat roof, on the above the top, the third floor. There is no dollar sign. There is no center. There is no top. There is no dollar sign. There is no top. What there is a center. And at the center of the female power structure is not a dollar sign. It's a big red heart. And that big red heart generates a lot of wonderful warmth and love and concern and caring and compassion. It's a relationship sustenance machine. And that's the good thing that women are trying to keep for themselves, just as we, back in the day, tried to keep the dollar sign for ourselves. So what is the essence of relationships? This is the one main thing. This is where I'm the hedgehog. The one main thing, the primary thing that we can identify with the red heart is your relationships to your children. Your relationships with your girlfriends, that's all nice too, but your relationships with your kids, that is really the essence of what many women, would literally die for. Men having equality in that space, in that dimension, in that network, in that convention center would be equality of fatherhood with motherhood. And that is the theory of my case, that the way to make things much healthier between men and women is for women to bite the bullet and allow what men had to bite the bullet and allow, except, in a mirror image. Men had to bite the bullet and say, okay, you're right. It was very selfish of us to think we were so wonderful and you were so stupid. And we see it now. You guys can be really good as scientists and as politicians and as business people. As a matter of fact, you've brought some things to business that we didn't even think about. All of this collaboration and work-life balance, all that stuff. We didn't even think about that. Hostile work environments. We didn't even think about that. Now we need to ask women, please, can you do the same for us and allow us to have the benefits of your traditional domain, just as you now have the benefits of our traditional domain? And the beauty of this, we can explain to women, is that it's not a zero-sum game. It's not you get less because we get more. It's that when we both have more, we can together create even more than that. Nobody gives up power willingly. That was one of the things feminism taught us. Nobody gives up power willingly, but we should observe that smart people will share it. And if they share it in a way that's loving and respectful, open-minded, humble, with appropriate self-reflection and appropriate willingness to say that you don't always get your way because you have a partner who deserves equal respect, that creates what we're all looking for. Happiness, respect, appreciation, validation, and there's even more good news. Just as there were women who were regarded as kind of oddballs, not so much in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, but you go back to the 1880s, 1890s, just as women were regarded as oddballs if they wanted to be lawyers, there are lots of men today who have really had it up to their eyeballs with the corporate world and would really like for their relationships not to be transactional like they are in business and in academia, but to be really intimate, loving, and caring.
Mm-hmm.
That's the kind of relationships I want. And that gets us to really why I wanted to be on your show, Michael, because it's the adaptive male.
Mm-hmm.
Now, sometimes, of course, adaptations are sort of forced upon you, but other times adaptations are sort of like, wow, what a great opportunity. And I'm not an anthropologist, but you know, the adaptation that we've been through, and men were very much sort of in the lead of this, was the transition that human beings made from hunter-gatherer to agricultural. So over a very short period of time, men went from being hunters to being farmers. And the jobs, the duties of the two occupations and the adaptation that men had to make was huge.
Mm-hmm.
And you might even imagine that back in the day when this transition was being made and the hunter guys were sort of looking around and seeing these other guys walking behind an ox, plowing a hunk of dirt to plant seeds. You can imagine that those hunter guys were saying, look at those sissies over there. What are they? Those poor guys. When, of course, these guys were smart. They were right. They saw the future. This is going to be much better for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're going to have a place where we can rely on, that we can get food from. It's not going to be catch as catch can. And oh my God, we're going to starve to death because the herd is 300 miles away.
Mm-hmm.
No, this is better. This is better. The adaptation that men, I think, at some very deep level, would really love to be able to make, to be given permission, to be given validation, to be given encouragement, to be appreciated by women as a really great mate, would be for men to say, yeah, I'm going to give up this hunter-gathering thing over here that I was doing in this skyscraper, and I'm going to go over here and I'm going to farm in this convention center, and I'm going to raise healthy kids. That is the one main thing of my theory of the case, and the relief that I'm seeking in this lawsuit, so to speak, is for the judge of cultural opinion, of public opinion, to say, yeah, women, these guys got a good point over here, and you can't do this anymore. You can't keep men out of your domain anymore unfairly with all of we can talk about all of the means they use to keep men away. You know, largely has to do with family courts, but not exclusively. That this has to change. And to the extent that the government needs to be involved, again, in the context of family courts, the government is going to dare to say, yeah, we're going to do some things for men now. And yes, I as a man am not going to be ashamed of saying that. I'm not going to be afraid to say that. And I know that there is this thing called the women's vote, whereby all of the women on the 1, 2, or first, second, or third floor of the convention center all know each other and all see the common interest that they have together, where they all will vote together to make sure that their position in close proximity to the big red heart is strong and healthy, causing them to vote as a unit. And even though men really can't be counted on in their corporate structure to vote as a unit, because there really is great stratification in the male power structure, great stratification of interests and well-being, whereby these men are probably likely to vote men at the top, very likely different from the men at the bottom. It's going to take a lot of courage. It's going to take a lot of leadership. But when we are able to accomplish this, the fruits of this case, women who are over here in the skyscraper now, who are worried about whether their daycare center for their kids is a good place or not, they don't worry about daycare centers anymore. They know that they got their husband,
Mm-hmm.
and they know he's a good guy, and they know he loves the kids as much as she does. And so she's got more energy to chase her career. She's excited, happy, relaxed, not stressed out by unnecessary worries. And he's happy. He's not going to have a heart attack at the age of 35 from stress, fighting the corporate structure, doing a job he doesn't really want to do. And he never chose it because he wanted to. It's because he just sort of like, oh, I guess I'm going to become an insurance salesman now because I want to get married and have kids, and oh well, I got to make some money. So okay, I'm going to do this, but I'm not really going to like it. I'm only going to like it because my wife is going to rely on that. She's no longer relying on that. I really hate this job. So to me, the one central thing that the hedgehog knows is the essential value to men of being recognized as kind, caring, gentle, nurturing, loving fathers, coaches, parents, teachers. It's very much something that we like doing and being. And we are literally, in some cases, dying for the opportunity. And by way of numbers, I'm not a big statistics guy, but I think it's worth noting that the Pew Research Center recently, I think within the past couple of years, found that men, even more than women in this supposedly difficult situation they're in, where they're trying to do both a job and a career, men more than women are saying they do not see their kids enough. They do not spend enough time with their kids. That's something we want. And making it happen could really just be so much better for everybody, because fathers are really important to kids. They're really important to wives. They're really important to families. They're really important to communities. And, male energy is good. And right now we're wasting a lot of it. You've heard the statistics about how many men in the prime working years are just completely disengaged from the workforce. What a waste of talent that is. He can be the full-time father or the main father, but have a little side hustle. Now, the guys who don't have any skills, it's going to be more difficult for them because, they're not going to be able to have a side hustle being a manual laborer, a ditch digger. It's going to be hard for them. Another thing that's going to be hard for them is to, one of the things that's going to be required to make this all possible is that we really need to make sure men are confident that if they make the investment to take their career, cash it in whatever way they can, and devote themselves, invest heavily, all of their talents, skills, emotions, hopes, joys in the family, they really need to know that their investment is secure, which means that we can no longer have it that a woman can come home from work one day or from her yoga class one day and say, Joe, we have to talk. I've fallen in love with Rodney, the yoga teacher, and I don't love you anymore. And he's wonderful because he does yoga and you don't. And I'm divorcing you. And of course, I'm taking the kids with Rodney and we're going to go to Arizona. So thank you. Goodbye. I mean, that's, of course, an exaggeration, but it is a plausible fear that can keep men from saying, oh, yeah, I'm going to go for that. Part of the adaptation has to be that we stand up and say, I ain't doing nothing different until you do this different.
There's a lot of overlap. 10 million things I could talk to about what you've said and all that, but there is an interesting layering between like society and then the group and then the individual and things like that. And even in the case of things like single parent households, the divorce courts, the family court system being very favorable to women that no one likes to hear, but the statistics across the board absolutely painted a certain way, I think there's also an inclination to have a people have a very quick interpretation of human biology, human psychology, human inferences, and it's like, well, the kid should be with mom. Why? Because moms are good with kids. Okay, in what age range? Under what conditions? In what circumstances? You might say like moms are really good with babies because maybe they can help breastfeed and they tend to be a little bit more attuned to like small, tiny infants. Not like pet fathers can't. That's more of their favorable area time frame to work in. What was I remember the story, and then the father, from my understanding, the father has more of a presence of some degree of conditional love, where it's like, mom, like no matter what happens, I love you to death. You could literally kill somebody tomorrow, and I'll still love you all the same. Dad's kind of like, let me see what you can do. Let me see where your limitations are. Let me see if I can put you out of your comfort zone, what you can handle, and understand that like you're gonna fall on your butt, you're gonna run and scrape your knees. And I remember a story I had one of my ex girlfriends. She was a nanny, and she had a little 2-year-old boy she would take care of, and she was at like a park somewhere, playground, and there was another like 1.5-year-old little kid nearby, and the father was on a bench nearby, and he's kind of like keeping an eye on him, but his kid's just running around playing, doing his thing, and he almost like falls, but he almost fell off like a 1 foot thing into like some soft gravel. It was gonna hurt, but it wasn't gonna kill the kid. And when she stops him, she catches him from falling, and she's like, "Oh, sir, just so you know, like I think your child almost fell," and he's like, "He'll be fine. It's okay." And she was like, no, I can't. No, you have to protect the child at all times. What are you doing? And she told me about this, and I was laughing. I was like, yeah, there has to be a certain degree to which you let your kids fall on their butt and learn, oh, that wasn't fun. I should do that next time. Don't let your kids run into traffic, obviously. But having that extension of what in the environment is going to push them out of their comfort zone in a healthy way. And I think what you're seeing is, I'm pretty sure it's been confirmed in certain ways, is like, you mentioned with the convention center, it's like an excessive over, not the word is, over exaggeration of more egalitarian and motherly instincts. Like protect everyone at all costs, make sure everyone gets extremely fair, everyone feels good, like emotions have to be flattened out, and like pushing dad out of the way on a collective level, as a result trying to protect the kids, only to then realize overprotecting the kids was one of the worst things you could have done. Safetyism as a movement was a massive disaster for a lot of people. A lot of men I talk to and work with, or a lot of women I talk to with my own work, where have husbands who are just like afraid of their own shadow, or their sons or their boys are afraid to go outside, afraid to take a chance, afraid to take a risk. And a lot of times it's because they didn't have that opportunity when they were young to take little risks, and then kind of get bigger and bigger and bigger, kind of like climbing the skyscraper in a way. And now seeing like what can happen when the pendulum goes way too far in one direction. Saying like everyone needs to feel good, everyone needs to be on the same page. We can't have anyone hurt ever. Moms are clearly the best without realizing that actually the longer term there's a reason dad needs to be in there in the first place, and then seeing how it goes. But I think there's also this collective, we'll say feminine, female desire. There's a little interesting research around this about like subconsciously how women, not to bash women, but women have like there's more of an error towards egalitarian demeanor in a group setting, such that if somebody like steps out of line a little bit, there's an urge to almost like pull them back. And the simplest way you could look at this is like women, for lack of a better word, slut shaming other women. Because the argument was that essentially that on a very pure hunter-gatherer biological level, women collectively would have set the price for sexual access from men. And that if one woman said, hey, I'm going to give it away for even cheaper, also every other woman was like, what the fuck? Now we have to make it cheaper too, or we need to pull you back in. We need to rein you back in so you like you're all on the same page. So when you see a woman walking around wearing like super low tight booty shorts and like a low cut shirt, other women looking at her like, what is she doing that for? Because she's saying, because it's kind of all saying, now I have to do that. Now I have to kind of like trying to flattening it. And so somebody kind of stepping up a little higher or lower collectively, it causes this implication I want to pull back in. But it lines up kind of nicely with a convention center thing of like everyone's on 1 to 2 floors, maybe 3 floors at most, not too far away from each other person, but then we're not realizing like, oh, there's a purpose to that skyscraper over there. But then, like you said before, asking the question, can we let the men into the convention center if we let you into the skyscraper? And maybe it's still a power thing under a different disguise. Maybe it looks like a convention center, but it's actually like the family courts is actually still a skyscraper in certain ways. And even a lot of the men that are coming through in these recent generations, that were, my personal theory is like twofold. It's post World War II and globalization, and yeah, post World War II and globalization, that a lot of men may have come back post World War One, post World War II, a lot of traumatic experiences that happened that weren't properly digested in a healthy, collective, social way. That then got coupled with, who cares about your feelings? Just go find a job. I mean, everyone's making so much money right now. Holy crap, the economy is so hot. You could literally buy a house and have the American dream tomorrow if you just pick up a job anywhere. Don't worry about your feelings. Just keep drinking. It's fine. Your wife likes to complain a lot. Just ignore her and talk to your buddies at a cigar lounge. And then after like 2 generations or 3 generations of this, it was just like, okay, we can't keep bottling up how hard of a time we're feeling. We can't keep bottling up our feelings. We can't keep just like pushing it down, burying it down the way we do, because guys are quite literally exploding at 3 to 4 times the normal rate of suicide rate. So it's like 75% globally, among other things. And then the globalization factor. I have a couple friends and people I've met who come from immigrant parents. It's a very similar dynamic where it's like the parents are like, we just have to work our asses off to survive, no time for feelings whatsoever. And they do great, but then within 1 or 2 generations, the kids start exploding again in a way. It's like, yeah, I'm really well off financially, but I just feel like I'm lacking this emotional connection that no one taught me how to do. Because they just told me I'm a man, men don't cry, men don't have problems, men you just shut up and deal with it. And how long can it go on before it just starts causing more problems? And I think we're starting to see this in current generations of younger men, and especially boys, seeing the impacts of people that grew up in those generations who don't know how to be in a healthy relationship, who don't know how allow women to be more expressive in a more productive way in terms of the workforce, but also men being more expressive in a more emotional and caretaking way. And it kind of clashes when they've had no experience and no idea of how to handle that, how to deal with that, which then leads to dysfunctional kids because the kids are getting modeled very poorly from their parents, which then repeats the whole process until it hits a breaking point, which is kind of what we're seeing today. That's my TED talk. Thank you for
I like
coming.
it. No, I think it's great. I think it's great, and it's very worthwhile, and I'm glad I had a chance to hear it. I know you are a student of of the brain, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Have you heard about recent research into what's being called the dad brain?
No, but I would probably believe it.
Check it out. Check it out. Well, the dad brain, I guess you could call an adaptation, and it is a change in the man's brain when he learns he's going to become a dad.
Yes, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Then there's a big shift in that. But it's like the big one was I talked to some guys who were just like they were young and aggressive and picking fights and going to the bar on a Friday night, rather just fight with whoever. And as soon as they're just like, you're gonna be a dad, like I need to calm down. Oh my god, like I can't be bringing this kind of energy around. Oh my god. And there is something to that. I think they've shown that they've shown us interestingly with men who have kids, their testosterone level kind of levels off, if not slowly diminishes, where like something like dad bod kind of comes in play, it gets a little bit heavier because his testosterone is so high. But also complement to that is men who did not have kids, that their testosterone kind of stayed high, if not elevated, even into their later years when they may not have been traditionally, like as reproductively successful, we'll say. Yeah, a man can get a woman pregnant up until the day he dies, but like your attractiveness kind of went down, but testosterone never really took that I'm a dad now dip. And then how testosterone, the dip was meant more so for the idea of like that same aggression that you had to try to compete with other men to get the woman is not the same aggression you need for you raising kids. You need to dial it back a little bit. And talking about how a lot of men will actually really just turn into a different person in a good way when they become a father.
Another example of males being adaptive.
Yeah, yeah. But the idea of how so much of these narratives, like we said before, are just being very pervasive on the internet and things like that, and especially culturally, saying that like, oh, look, all the problems are men, they're this or that, and then now men are afraid to approach women, women are afraid to approach men. A lot of women may have misguided perceptions of what a man should or shouldn't do or can and can't do. Guys have the same problem. Plenty of guys I talk to just have sometimes it's like it's simple things that they just haven't been taught of. It's just like like a funny example is like, well, she said she wasn't hungry, but then I went out and got food and I didn't get any for her, and then she got mad because actually she wanted some of my French fries. And it's like, well, she's kind of saying she is without saying she, but it's just like these little nuances in a relationship and things like that. But very commonly, even then, it's just men that never got taught how to just engage with their emotions, engage with their shame, their guilt, their joy, their happiness. So like realizing you have more purpose to the world than just being a provider. Realizing that people can actually like you just for you and not because you do something for them. And even maybe you are kind of doing something for them. You're just being you, and they like that. And I got a lot of guys who just have this confusion where I'm like, what am I if I'm not my paycheck? Like you have a lot of other things you can do. You have a lot you can contribute to the world and to your family, to your friends, your community. But I think there becomes this inclination towards isolation because they're not sure where they fit in next, and they don't. It's very easy to not connect men are wonderfully like logical, and it's just like I have to see how A connects to B connects to C, or else I don't see the point in doing it. Whereas women tend to be more like, well, we'll just kind of let you figure it out, and then depending on how I go, how I feel that day. But yeah, when you get guys that don't understand how to connect the dots of like, you may not be able to put a price tag on the importance of being around as a father when your kids are little, but it's fucking valuable. Like there's things going on that you can't directly see. Like you're bringing a level of peace and guidance and calmness and whatever to the household that it's like, well, what if I work more hours at work? If I buy even a bigger house? The amount of people I've seen who have come from affluent families and it's like, yeah, my dad was a millionaire and I still hate my life. I have no connection to him. He just worked all the time. I never got to see him. Or the guys that I talked to are just like, well, I have to make over 300 grand a year or else, like a toddler, like a little kid, maybe like a 4, 5, 6, 7 year old boy. They don't understand what a like $500,000 house versus a $5 million house versus a $50 million house looks like. They can see the difference in the size, maybe, but it's like no matter what price range you're at, you're still just dad or you're still just mom. And this is what I tell people: it's like you don't underestimate the importance and value of just spending time with people, especially your kids. I understand like there is so much value going on that you just can't obviously see. But the best way we can now measure seeing it really is in the impact of not having dad around, the statistics that are popping up as a result. This is a good quote. It was like traditions are just experiments that work. And the idea being of like, well, what does dad do? Like, well, we don't know, but why don't we take him away and see what happens? Oh, that's what dad did. Okay. Look at that. Yeah. Same thing with women too, but certain dynamics in the culture today are really just like man bashing, but not realizing like, well, it's probably going to get worse if you keep at this. And we're starting to see some early signs of the stats of fatherless, like how boys don't do as well with their fathers. Boys have a different learning style when it comes to schooling. They just have more like that ambitiousness. They a lot more that want to be engaged, interactive fathers, and you're letting them be. The court system's favoring it, and the kids not having the best kind of results later on. A lot of different books I've read around that, like the benefits of father, benefits of two parents, boys needing, I think more so than anything, they need emotional expression modeled. They need to be taught like, oh, when I feel this, it means anger. This is what I can do about it. When I feel this, it means shame or guilt or embarrassment or loneliness. Or most men I talk to, it's just like, well, how are you feeling? Well, I'm either angry, I'm horny, or I'm just kind of just relaxing, doing nothing. There is no other thing. It's like, all right, well, something tragic just happened. How do you feel? Angry. Something sad just happened. How do you feel? Angry. Something, you haven't talked to them, you haven't socialized with them. Well, how are you feeling? Also angry. It's like, okay, there's other feelings in there you have too, but nobody taught you. Nobody demonstrated it to you because it was just a whole generation of shut up, men don't cry, men don't have feelings, men can't be nurturing and caring and emotional and all this stuff. And then now just, yeah, like starting to see like this other side of like, oh, to me, it's like that logic of, if you see a fence in the middle on a field in the middle of nowhere, don't just remove it thinking it didn't have a purpose just because you can't see the purpose yet.
Oh, that story.
I think it was something along the lines with like politicians and how certain politicians, they're like, if they see a fence in a field somewhere, but they don't see what it could be used for, they're just like, why don't we just get rid of it? Because I can't see what purpose it has. Versus some people saying like, wait until you see if something happens to know why the fence is there in the first place. And the same thing I think maybe goes with parenting and fathers and how we interact. It's like, well, we don't understand. Boys are totally like, kids are fine without their fathers. Like, yeah, maybe in a very, 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 very small time frame of history, but multi-generationally, we're seeing how it's starting to blow up people's face and cause all these problems. Yeah.
Indeed. I do have an additional piece of research I thought you might be interested in.
Sure. Yeah.
Right along these lines. It's about fathers and empathy. How fathers are important to raising empathic kids. This is research by Richard Kestner, the primary researcher, from 1990 in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. It's a longitudinal study that they did about the relationship between paternal involvement and the kids learning empathy. Here's the excerpt I want to read to you. The influence of paternal involvement in childcare on later empathic concern was quite astonishing. That's not really the kind of term you hear coming from, a peer-reviewed journal, but it was quite astonishing. This single dimension, and the single dimension is the paternal involvement in childcare, this single dimension accounted for a greater percentage of the unique variance in empathic concern scores than the three strongest maternal predictors combined. So, there it is. We don't, it's sort of the fence in the middle of the field. We don't really know how it works or what it's doing, but it works and it's important, and let's not throw it away.
Yeah. Even in the case of that sounds like traditional marriage, for example, is under a lot of attack nowadays, but it's the same thing. It's like, take it away and see what happens. But the empathic thing that kind of brought up a thought for me was really interesting learning about how we've lost a lot of male initiation rites and rituals in the modern age. Like some cultures, maybe if maybe if you're Jewish, you go through a bar mitzvah, maybe even things like apprenticeship programs for men in the trades tends to be almost like a male initiation in a way, because it's not just teaching you the trade, it's also teaching you how to engage and work with other guys and how to cooperate and things like that. And how in the case of male initiation, culturally, it was looked at as very barbaric and brutish. Like, why would they just throw a little young boy into the woods and have him survive by himself for 3 days? But it was maybe a little intense in today's day and age. But the intention behind it was essentially to get guys, young boys turning into men, to become two things in particular. One, they had to become very acclimated to discomfort. And a big part of that was learning to deal with your emotions. It's like, we're going to stir up your emotions by doing something that sucks, and you're going to learn not how to suppress it, but just how to move through it. How to be like, okay, this sucks, but I'm not going to die. I don't need to always listen to my emotional signals firing off as hard as they do. And I even a good example is I like to do once in a while, I'll take cold showers, like a 3-minute really cold shower. And I'm basically throwing out every curse word in the book that you could think of for those 3 minutes, because it's the worst thing. But at the same time, you're still despite all these signals going off your body saying, get the hell out, get it. What are you doing? What are you doing? You're also saying to yourself, yeah, but you're not going to die. This does suck, but you'll be okay. You will survive. I promise. And then afterwards, you're when you do something like that, you're kind of saying wow, if I could handle that, what else could I do? That wasn't as bad as I thought it was. Because when you walking into it, everything's oh my God, this is gonna be the worst thing ever. In the middle of it, oh my God, this is horrible, holy crap. And then while you're done, you're whoa, okay, I'm alive. And the second thing in male initiation is this idea of a healthy relationship with helplessness and surrender. Because the idea was that there are forces in this world that are just bigger than you'll ever be able to do anything about. You can't control the weather, you can't control climate, you can't people death is going to happen, the unexpected events are going to happen. You need to be able to just accept the fact on some level that there are things you can control and things you can't control. And I think in today's day and age, a lot of men, there's a combination of men who do not know how to handle discomfort, safetyism and things like that, really protecting too much as a kid. Any kind of small emotional perturbance happens and they lose it. You see this with a lot of college kids nowadays under certain circumstances. And also that men will too heavily try to focus on the things that they can control in an effort to avoid emotionally digesting the things that they can't control. If I could just a good example, or not say can't control, you can't control your partner, but you can control your influence on a relationship. But maybe a lot of men will say, well, I could work on my marital issues, or I could just work more hours at work, and I can control my paycheck in that regard. So I should just keep working. This will solve my problems. It ends up becoming almost like a boredom avoidance in a way, rather than acknowledging that like there are things you can do to try to influence parts of your life, but it's not going to be fun. It's not going to be comfortable. And I think a big part of that ties back into the empathy thing and even to the emotional thing with fathers, is that a good father should be able to teach his son, like, this is how you deal with discomfort, and this is how you accept the fact that there are things you can only do so much to affect in the world, and that's okay. And then when you remove that, I get this a lot. Have you ever heard of nice guy syndrome?
Yeah, heard of it.
It's a nice way of saying male codependency, emotional codependency, and basically it's guys that basically put all their sense of self-worth and worthiness on somebody else, usually in the context of a committed emotional relationship. This is where you get friend zone situationships, things like that, where the guy's like, yeah, I'm seeing somebody, we're not dating yet, but I haven't told her I'm interested in her, but I'm just hoping maybe she'll be interested if I just happen to stick around long enough. But a lot of the way people that attribute to that, one of the big parts of it tends to be an overexposure to mom growing up. And I can say this firsthand, that my mother kind of made, without realizing, growing up, I became her emotional caretaker. And a lot of men have the same problem of being like, oh, my job is to take care of you, not figure out what do I want to do? Where's my place in the world? What can I do for myself? And then usually mom in some way may have pushed dad or kicked dad out of the picture to keep their son as that emotional caretaking piece. A lot of like young men that are like almost married to their moms because they for whatever reason they kicked dad out of the frame. Maybe dad just left, and there are piece of crap fathers that may have done that for whatever reason they did. But there's also dads that, like you see in the family court system, they want to be involved, but the family court system plus the mothers are just like keeping them away. And there may be something subconscious going on there where it's like, well, I the way I phrase it is like, mothers love him, women hate him. And you see this a lot with guys who have like are really bad mama's boys, and it's almost a turnoff to women to basically say like your whole existence is just focusing on this woman and not me, or trying to like taking your attention towards me, or you don't have a much of a like I say a spine or a backbone, but you don't have a good sense of boundaries because she basically kept them low to try to keep her emotional needs met through you. And then it turns into these guys who just cannot function well in relationships, or they don't know how to engage with women in a long-term intimate relationship and things like that. And it tends to be on some level because somewhere along the line their dad did not have that healthy influence that they needed growing up to not say turn them into the men they need to be, but to essentially teach them like, this is what healthy masculinity looks like, this is what emotional empathy looks like, this is what anger and self-regulation looks like, this is what overcoming difficulty looks like, this is what being okay with certain things and surrender and helplessness looks like. And if they don't get that, they just turn into like, just, I wouldn't say overgrown. They'll either turn into these nice guys, or they'll hyper focus in certain areas of their life without really filling that emotional bucket the way they needed to, because nobody taught them how to. You see this a lot on Wall Street, for example. A lot of guys who are just like, if I just make an even bigger paycheck, it'll just make that weird pain go away in the back of my mind from my dad didn't hug me. I don't know if I was a kid, or the fact that I was raised like, or the guys who are raised with single mothers and they just become like ultra work focused because they're just like, I have to be the man of the house subconsciously in the back of my head, that I haven't actually let up because some reason dad was just kind of kicked out of the frame. And I wonder to what degree this is like a multi-generational problem of like how many generations of men being pushed to the side, at least the average man, not like the Elon Musk and Steve Jobs of the world at the top of the skyscraper we're talking about. How much of average men are being pushed to the side because for whatever reason women were being taught men are bad, men are evil, men are going to beat you up, men are going to mess up your kids. They're going to do this. They're going to let the kid fall down at the playground, God forbid, things like that. And then now it leads to this massive cultural shift we're seeing with men just going, I don't know what my purpose is here. I don't know where to start. I was told to just get a job and I did that, but I can't emotionally connect because no one taught me how to do emotions. I don't know how to be empathetic because I've never taught how to. And then we led up where we are right now. And yeah.
Smart man, Michael
Thank you.
Read. Yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
Yes, sir. Are you familiar with, you had a very interesting riff about anger. Are you familiar with the concept of anger as a secondary emotion?
No, not in that context.
So it's pretty handy in talking with men. We often respond to emotional situations with anger, as you pointed out, almost in a stand-up comedy kind of way, which was really interesting, informative, and entertaining. We respond often with anger to emotional situations because anger is like the one emotion that men are supposed to express because it's quote unquote so manly.
Yep.
But it's not really the emotion we are trying to deal with. The primary emotion might be sadness. Now, what man has permission to say, oh man, I'm so sad. I'm so sad. No, what he's got to do is say, this makes me so mad that I'm sad. Right? Sadness is what we got to talk about.
Yep.
So that we don't have to get angry, because anger pushes people away. Imagine being able to say to your wife, I'm just so sad. I am so sad. If your wife loves you, she's going to say, really? What? Now, some wives will say, oh, well, that's really a turnoff. Yuck.
The ick. Yeah.
But if you got a good woman, she's going to say, really? What's going on? You want to talk about it?
Yeah. Yeah. What was funny about that? Sorry, what was
and that saves the whole anger episode. You don't have to get angry. You get what you really want, which is, some approximation of maybe not being so sad.
Yeah, men need, everyone kind of needs some degree, some degree of permission to express certain emotions. The way I've explained it to people is like, you can have a cascade of multiple thoughts at once, but you only have space in your conscious mind for one at a time, generally speaking. Like what you're aware of. What are you feeling right now? I'm angry. What are you really feeling? Angry, scared, embarrassed, guilty, shameful. You're feeling everything. It's just that you only have space for one of them. And if anger is the biggest one right now, it's all you're going to see. But it is sitting back behind that anger is other things that's deeper down. That's why I've heard them referred to as like the lower emotions. And people say like, oh, that just means it's less than. Like, no. It's like down deeper, lower down beneath the surface of, like, if the surface is anger, it's like, if you look at, a good analogy might be like, if you look like a hurricane over a giant body of water like the ocean, the very surface, it's just giant waves going, holy crap. But if you go down deep enough, it's calm. It's quiet, it's cold, it's different. So like sadness and grieving and shame might be more of like a slower, sadder emotion. But if you're near the surface, all you're going to see is these giant, holy crap, waves blowing through. But a lot of men have not been given permission to sit with the anger until it finally dissipates, because it's my interpretation is essentially is like, your brain does not lower its guard until it knows you're safe. And safety can also be emotional safety. I have to know I'm not going to get judged. I'm not going to get criticized. My status isn't going to be diminished. My reputation's not going to get hit. My wife's still going to love me. My friends are not going to look at me differently. My buddies are not going to think I'm less of a man. Because if anything, it's like, what are you crying about? Oh, I'm fine. Everything's fine. I'm good. Okay, I'm good. Everything's fine. Really, no. It's like, what did you feel? Like, oh, they thought like you were just being less than manly right there. When in reality, you had a legitimate emotion that needs to be expressed in a healthy way, but you can't do it solo. This is why it's so much easier to have it's like group therapy and things like that. But what women are wonderful this. It's like they're feeling an emotion, they'll just call up one of their best friends and just start crying on the phone, and just afterwards, like, oh my God, I'm sorry. And it's almost like recognizing you're feeling that. But guys will just push it down. Can't be sad, can't be that. And you mentioned with some of the good wives. My personal theory about this is that we had a generation of men who were just so overly competitive while mixing into a very uprising economy that they just basically they weren't modeling or dealing with their emotions in a healthy way. And then they may have had sons of their own, but the sons didn't see dad having his emotions, or if they had daughters, they didn't see mom interacting with dad's emotions in a healthy way. They get fully grown up, and they never got exposure to what does it look like for a man to move through his emotions. And then you just get several generations of that. Now you have women that are just like, when he cries, it makes me feel uncomfortable. I just get, why? Because I never saw it. And you need to give yourself permission to say, like, if you've never seen it, how could you know how to respond to it? It's like, oh, my wife, attacks me when I get sad. What is she really saying? I don't know what's going on, and it's freaking me out. I don't, or a lot of guys that have never been like at that kind of space to be emotional, and they just, I only ever get angry. All I ever feel is angry. It's like, yeah, because it's the biggest one you feel right now. But if you stopped and took a breath and let it pass, you'd feel a lot of other things coming. And sometimes we get guys who straight up have no idea what guilt or shame or fear or fear, yeah, maybe, but loneliness feels like in their body. Like if I get mad, my face gets red, my chest gets hot, whatever it is. Maybe I start vibrating a little bit. But like shame for me is usually like a stab in the gut, like directly in my abdomen. It's just like this pang feeling hits. Or if I feel embarrassed, my shoulders kind of get like this buzzing feeling goes across my chest. It's just like, oh God, I can't believe I just did that. Oh my God, that was so embarrassing. Holy crap. Like, oh, I can't believe you just, that was so, I'm so sorry. That was so weird. But I know what each emotion that my body is signaling to me means, because I've actually spent the time to be like, oh, this feels like anger. This feels like shame. This feels like, most guys, what does anger feel like? What does horniness feel like? What does boredom feel like? That's all I know. But the other emotions have different physical signs that your body will give to you to say, like, you're feeling shame, you're feeling guilt, you're feeling lonely, you're feeling sad, you're feeling horny, whatever it may be. And you have to have the ability to tie a feeling to it. Because your brain doesn't say, you're feeling sad, feel sad. It just goes, here's a feeling, figure it out. And it's just how it is, unfortunately, for a lot of guys. And they don't know how to express it, how to identify it, how to express it, and then also making sure they have the right people around to express it to. Because if they don't have that person to express it to, you can't grieve in isolation. It doesn't work. Like you can try to, you can pretend, oh, I'll just cry by myself in a corner. Like it's not going to get out of your system the same way. Or like a big thing, these men's groups is like giving them permission to be like, to talk about what they went through or what they did. Because what they'll do is they'll have an idea in their head of how something should be perceived. I feel a lot of shame. Why? Because when I was 10 years old, I stole a donut from the donut shop. Whatever that. Like, it's like, or you hear the stories about young guys who are like in their teenage years, and they just, oh my God, I can't believe I stole this thing from a store when I was a kid, and I feel like crap. I just feel shameful about just one thing that I did. Or even more commonly, what I see nowadays is men who may have cheated on their wives. And there is a lot of understandable and some degree due shame and guilt, but they're not looking at the bigger picture of like, well, I'm pretty sure your marriage wasn't going fantastic, and one day you decided, you know what, I feel like cheating on my wife today. It's usually like something else is going on behind the scene in the relationship. Maybe something you tried approaching her about, she approached you about. When's the last time you actually had time together? When's the last time you were intimate? When's the last time you went on a date? Is there things that are being swept under the rug? Why? Because I don't feel comfortable having those conversations. Why? Because I can't tolerate having emotions. So I'll just keep focusing on my job, keep my head down. She says she's fine. I don't need to talk to her. Everything's fine. And then it just, that feeling builds and builds and builds and builds. And then one day, as a guy, they'll cross paths with a woman who's having the exact same problem in the opposite side of her own marriage or relationship. Their radar systems go off like, oh, you hate your husband? Yeah, I hate my wife. Okay, perfect. Oh, cool. Let's go hang out in the broom closet. And then, boom, big mistake happens. And then they walk away going like, what the hell happened? Because there's a litany of emotions and undigested conversations that you did not digest and go through in a healthy way that led to this moment. And then you have to be able to sit down with a group of guys and like work through it and say like, yeah, I fucked up, but I also had an unmet need, and it's okay to have needs and be able to express it. And then, yeah, all this stuff ties into everything. It's crazy. But the big underlying point that I'm getting to with all this is the idea of you have to show it to guys. Guys have to see what moving through emotion feels like. Guys have to see what expressing shame looks like. They have to feel what it feels like and then put a name to it. They have to feel their emotions, give permission to feel their emotions. And sometimes it's a matter of even like meditating and things just to practice the method of like reconnecting with yourself emotionally, because you've become so dissociated from yourself. You've learned to just numb out that signal from your brain, reconnecting it, letting it flow again, opening up old bottles. Could be, crying, could be getting angry at people, somebody in your past, somebody you didn't deal with, something traumatic that happened years ago from your childhood, and then doing it in front of people that are not going to judge you, to then reset the whole system and then move forward from there. Yeah. TED Talk.
Another good one. Is there, as a hedgehog,
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, is there a word that could encompass, one word, maybe a theme word? Is there one word that can encompass everything you just spoke about in the past few minutes? What ties it all together? And if you
Vulnerability.
okay,
That's a big
okay.
one.
So can you want to talk a bit about what what you see and think about vulnerability? I know you just talked a lot about examples of it. Vulnerability is a good thing, huh? Right? Okay,
Absolutely.
vulnerability is a good thing because why? What's how will things be better if men get more comfortable with vulnerability?
I'd say vulnerability with other men can be a good one, but even with women too. But it's you like processing emotions. If you want to talk about the neuroscience of it, like the simplest thing is like you're going into fight or flight. Emotions are just information from your environment. Like a big thing that people it kind of blows my mind, but people don't recognize is that you're seeing things that you don't realize you're seeing. You see this a lot with people who are recovering from like some kind of trauma, where like they'll be out and about in a crowd somewhere, and they'll just get a flash of anxiety for like what they think is no reason. But in reality, they didn't realize they were scanning the crowd, and somebody just happened to resemble that one guy who beat the shit out of them 10 years ago, and their brain went off on a fire alarm. And so, any kind of emotion you're feeling, if you're feeling shame, you're feeling guilty, you're feeling lonely, you're feeling angry, that's just your body telling you that something somewhere, either internally or externally, triggered something that needs to be addressed. But we're not evolved enough that we can just readily see like, oh, I had an anxiety moment because of that one. It's more often than not what we do with like even with like things like therapy or coaching or shadow work, like Carl Jung stuff. It's like you have to almost peel back the layers by talking it out. Women do this all the time, where it's like they'll just what we consider them they're just ranting about random stuff. I don't understand. Like they're just talking. But what they're really doing is saying like, I got like 10 signals that went off at once. 8 of these might be false, but 2 of them might be valid, but I don't know which one it is. And I only have space for one thing at a time in my head. So I'm going to go one by one, seeing which one. That wasn't that, wasn't that, wasn't that. Oh, maybe it's that. That's the problem. Oh, I'm hungry. Oh, I'm actually tired. And you see the people who don't recognize, like, if you're really hungry and really tired, you're like a different person. But your body doesn't tell you, go eat something and take a nap. It just says, you feel like this now, figure it out. And you notice this pretty easily with little kids and babies. It's like you can almost even tell like what their issues are. But it's usually it's a set of a particular. Does a diaper need to be changed? Do they need to be held? Do they need to be fed? Do they need to be burped? It's usually like one of 5 different things. But as an adult, we still really don't have these kind of abilities to figure out and sort through the noise of what's really bothering you. Like men that are emotionally reactive, very short-tempered, short fuse. Maybe occasionally you'll get the person who has some kind of personality disorder or some kind of neurological defect that leads to that. More often than not, though, it's like if you're constantly pissed off, you've got something you didn't deal with in the back of your head. It's still ringing around, bouncing around your subconscious. And the only way to really get to that, oh, here comes my cat. The only way to get to that feeling is by like lowering your guard enough to let the feeling come out, to then figure out, oh, I'm really pissed off at work because I hate my job. I hate my job because I was forced to get it. I hate forced to get it because I was told this. I was forced to do it because my dad, didn't care about me enough as a kid. Whatever it may be. As I mentioned the thing with the Wall Street guys earlier, how a lot of men will go like extremely hyper career focused because they, which is being a goofball, extremely hyper career focused because they don't realize they're actually kind of numbing out another pain somewhere else in the back of their head that they can't figure out why they're dealing with. Or men who have like porn addiction, for example. What's really happening is like you might just be bored. You can't tolerate the boredom, but your body doesn't tell you you're bored. It just says, "Oh, suddenly I feel like going and watch porn and masturbating." Or maybe you have intimacy desires. Maybe you really feel lonely because you actually haven't been intimate with somebody in a long time, or maybe even in the context of a long-term marriage. And until you get to a point where you can sit down, lower your guard, feel like you're safe in front of people that can help you sort it out, because even you'll talk it out, you'll say things and be like, "Oh, did you hear what you just said?" Or did you see the connection here? Those things that you didn't really feel a connection to. Until you lower that guard to then show those people those things, to have them look at it with you, you're just going to cause more problems. And that really requires a certain level of conscious vulnerability to basically get to that point. You have to be comfortable with saying like, I trust you guys to not attack me for what I show you when I open up.
So could we say that vulnerability is about being willing? I won't really put a value judgment on it of like, brave enough. I'll just say willing to feel the bad feelings that you really feel.
Yeah, yeah. Autonomy is a big one. Agency, another way to say it for people in general. I think I remember hearing a definition of trauma. It was like trauma was like essentially a moment of like a violation of your autonomy, where like you didn't get to choose what the outcome of the moment was, and it emotionally impacted you more than it was. Especially maybe as like a little kid, if you're dealing with some kind of childhood traumas, like your parents are just being emotionally abusive or physically abusive, they're kind of violating some degree of a healthy social relationship with you by taking away your autonomy, because you can't go anywhere. You have to just stay there and just deal with it on some levels. And dissociation kind of ties along heavily into that one. A lot of guys who just can't stay in their own mind. They kind of just like there's like that 1,000-yard stare from guys who are like coming in from post World War, things like, or in kind of war combat type things. But the biggest underlying point is that you do have to give men the choice. So they're not gonna, I mean, human beings, like men in particular, though, they kind of have to say like, this is your choice to do this, whatever it is. Like your choice is to, if you want to work on this is how we do it, but you have to be the one that opens the door. You have to be the ones that like shows up to the group meetings or to the therapy or to the coaching and says like, I am going to voluntarily choose to let my guard down right now, and I hope this doesn't blow up in my face, whatever it may be. But yeah, a lot more men just need permission to be vulnerable. And permission comes from external as well as internal. You have to be able to let yourself drop your guard, but also you want to do it in the company of people that are not going to judge you or attack you or beat you up for it.
Yeah, that's a matter of trust. The
Mm-hmm.
other folks have to be people you can trust.
Yeah. And what we see a lot with like what I run a men's group right now. It's through a bigger collective, through this program that I learned how to do the coaching from. And I have like one or two guys I actually work with, like one-on-one on the side. And what was interesting to note was that a lot of these coaches, what they'll generally do, what is going? Cat's going. Yeah, okay. A lot of the coaches, they'll say like minimum 3 months to work with me, or even with a therapist. Same thing. Why? Because you need to learn to trust me first. And trust is not so much me saying like, "Oh, you could trust me." Those are just words. But when we've repeatedly talked to each other over and over, and every time I bring something up heavy, and you don't have the reaction that I think you're going to have, oh, I can trust you a little more. Oh, I could trust you a little more. I could trust you a little more. And even with the men's group that I run, it's like 3 guys in there. And it's so funny. I think in the very, very beginning, when we first started out, they were just like, yeah, we got some problems, but I'm just here working. And now they're just like, oh my God, I got to tell you like the deepest, darkest secrets of the worst crap that happened to me when I was a kid and this and that and what's going on. I'm just like, yeah, like think about where you were 3 months ago. But like there is a natural barrier that goes up with people that's like trust takes time. Yeah.
What do they say after they have had the experience of being able to tell you about this horrible thing that happened to them years ago? What'd
They're
you do
usually
for
very
them?
appreciative. It's kind of like it gets them to take a breath they never could before. Because there's just like they walk away going like, I didn't know. Because what I think what's happening internally is that I remember hearing about this. It was like we're wired neurologically to value status and reputation over food and water. Because if you have status and reputation, somebody will bring you food and water. Arguably, it's like more important to be part of the group than it is to find like resources, because the group will work together to get resources. So you want to make sure the group is like cool with you in some way. But that works against you sometimes when you think like, if I'm honest about if I'm honest, this is what we tell little kids all the time. It's like, whatever you did, I'll be less mad if you tell me the truth. Yeah, and what's saying is like, don't lie, because we really want to see you're being authentic and honest. Because it's so easy for words to just create some kind of bullshit. But when we see that the person is honest and they're saying what they mean and their actions line up, then it actually lets us lower our guards a little bit. And then afterwards, they walk away going like, "Wow, I really thought I was a shitty person for having felt this thing or did this thing when I did back in the day, but now you're treating me like a human being." Or like, oh, I feel trusted, I feel seen, I feel acknowledged. I feel a thing that like maybe I didn't felt like my dad never gave to me or my mom never gave to me. I didn't realize I could talk about this openly without being attacked over it, because a lot of social media is notorious for that for that kind of stuff, where it's like, oh, you did something wrong, time to crucify you, rather than say like, oh no, you're a human being and we all screw up sometimes. It's okay. But having these spaces, yeah, the guys will walk away going like, wow, I didn't know I could even tackle these problems, but I didn't know that I needed like permission to talk about it openly and get feedback from people, and to recognize, like, I have one guy I'm working with is so funny. One like little tiny thing is having like, I got a problem with his wife, is that he's been married for like 20 plus years, got kids, but when his wife is like cooking at night and she's usually like prepping dinner and whatnot, she doesn't like to be bothered. But for whatever reason, he just likes to like then go up to her and give her a hug and a kiss. And she's like, "Oh my god, I love you too, but I've got like 16 different things and the pot's going and the microwaves. I'm sorry, I can't right now." And then he walks away. Oh, I feel crappy because she's told me a million times, over and over again, don't interrupt me. Like afterwards, yeah, I love it. I love the love and affection, but just in the middle of it, please, I'm busy. I can't multitask and focus. And so I told him, like, set an alarm. Like, when does this happen? When does she usually cook dinner? Like, oh, like 5:30 at night. I'm like, set an alarm that's going to repeat itself on your phone for like 4:45 every night. It's going to say, don't interrupt her. Do it afterwards. Because he'll walk away feeling like, oh, I feel like she rejected me. Like, no, she didn't. She's just really busy and she can't multitask and she can't give you her full focus and attention right there. But your subconscious will interpret it as, there must be something wrong with me. Because when I wanted it to bid for connection, I didn't get it. She rejected me. I feel like a piece of crap now. When in reality, it's just like, no, you just got bad timing. It's literally what it is. And if you could just practice and train yourself to say, okay, she's cooking, don't talk to her until afterwards. After dinner, we're going to cuddle and watch a movie, and it's going to be amazing. And after a while, you'll get like, oh, she wasn't mad at me. She was just busy. Okay, totally fine. Yeah.
You're quite a character.
Thank you. I
And
enjoy this stuff.
I'll bet you're a damn good coach too.
Thank you. It's early stages of that right now, but I'm looking into this is part of the podcast is meant to do, is to try to like just get more ideas, more interaction with people, more guys, people who are interested in talking about the men's health space, men's mental health and things like that, and then just getting thoughts and ideas of how to work from there. But yeah.
And I bet you'd be a great stand-up comic.
Thank you.
Really?
Have to try it out sometime.
And you're also a damn good podcaster.
Thank you. Thank you. Triple compliment. I appreciate that.
You bet. You bet.
Is there any last topics that you wanted to touch on?
Oh, guys.
Or we could do it for next time if you like.
Yeah, let's put me on ice for a year and let's see if people even liked what we did, and
yeah,
our little Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin act. do you remember that? Are you old enough to remember Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis?
Yeah, I have to YouTube it one more time. I think I've probably seen it before.
We could be Abbott and Costello.
That I know. Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
They're classic. No, it's been really fun talking with you.
Awesome. Thank you. You too. It's been fascinating.
Thank you.
Where can we find your content?
Malefriendlymedia.com. It's all one word, no hyphen between male and friendly, just malefriendlymedia.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jack. I appreciate the time today.
Thank you, Michael. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.